don't break down. They just go quiet. They become easier to deal with, easier to work with, easier to live with, easier to love. And somewhere in the middle of becoming manageable, they stop fully feeling their own life. That's not always healing. Sometimes that's sedation. This is where we talk about the things most people avoid: identity, pain, avoidance, performance, emotional survival, and the quiet distortions that pass for health in modern life. I'm not here to help you feel better for 5 minutes. I'm here to help you see more clearly, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Today I'm doing something also most authors won't do. I'm giving you direct access to my 4th book, Sedated, while it's still being written. Not after it's been cleaned up. Not after it's been polished into something safer to consume. Nope. Right now, in draft form. So this episode is a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the book. You're getting access to the ideas while they're still unfolding, still being shaped, still carrying the weight that comes before the final polish. Most people only show you the finished product. I want to show you the living process. This is going to be an ongoing series, and we're going to work through the entire book chapter by chapter. So if this is your first episode and it hits a nerve, stay with me. I'm not giving you a surface summary here. I'm opening up the whole process, one chapter at a time. Today we're getting into our first layer of Sedated, the idea that many people are not broken in the way you think they are. They are not failing because they feel too much. More often, they have learned to feel less. So well for so long that numbness now passes as maturity. That's what we're pulling apart today. Welcome back to The Architect of Self. I'm Carl Gregory, and for a long time now, I've been worked in the kind of spaces where people stop pretending. Trauma, survival, collapse, identity. The parts of a person that get shaped under pressure and then mistaken for personality later. I've sat with people who looked strong from the outside and were completely spent on the inside. People holding marriages together, families together, careers together, and entire emotional systems together, usually by swallowing what they actually felt. So before we start, a quick disclaimer. This episode includes a discussion of mental health, emotional pain, numbness, trauma, depression, and suicide-related themes. This podcast is for educational and reflective purposes only. This is not a replacement for therapy, crisis intervention, or medical care. If you're barely hanging on right now, this episode is not your lifeline. This is not enough support for what this moment requires. Pause this, call someone, text someone, knock on a door. And if you're in the U.S., call or text 988 for the Crisis Lifeline. It's available 24/7. If you're in immediate danger, call 911 or get to the nearest emergency room. You're not a burden for needing help. You are not broken for needing more than a podcast can give. Let's dive into it. You're not broken. You're sedated. Not with fanfare, and not with some visible fracture. There was not always one night where everything shattered. No hospital admission, no public unraveling, no clear moment people could point and say, that's when it happened. Usually, it was quieter than that. A slow leaching of color, just enough muting to wake up without dread, just enough containment to move through the day without visible damage. Just enough control that life stopped feeling like it might spill out and become something you could actually carry without strain. And because it happened in increments, it did not look like loss. It looked like progress. It arrived so gradually that it disguised itself as improvement. You told yourself you were growing up. You told yourself you were learning regulation. You told yourself you were finally mastering the art of not letting everything get to you. You learned to swallow the sharp reply before it left your mouth, to breathe through irritation until it flattened into neutrality, to redirect tears into private spaces, to keep your face presentable, to keep your day moving, to keep things from spilling over. And it worked. Intensity receded, edges rounded, chaos backed off. Your nervous system logged it as a win. Less amplification, fewer consequences. But while you were collecting those wins, something else was happening in the background. Temporary measures were becoming permanent settings. Coping stopped being a bridge and became the final destination. Nothing screamed wrong. Nothing collapsed loudly enough to force examination. Life just kept running. The coffee stayed warm. The routine stayed intact. The conversation still happened. The laughter still came out on cue. The day still moved. But the private charge inside it all began to fade. The ceremony disappeared first, then contrast, then texture. What remained was function. And this is where I want to slow it down because this is the part most people miss. Most people think numbness should feel dramatic. They think if they were truly disconnected, they would know it. They imagine numbness as some dead, gray, cinematic state where nothing works and everything is obviously wrong. That is not usually how it presents, though. Usually it presents as competence. Usually it presents as someone saying, "I'm good." And on paper they are. Bills paid, job handled, responsibilities met, no visible crisis, no major explosion. No one around them is panicking. So why would they question it? That's the trap. That's how sedation works. This is why it makes it so dangerous. It protects you when protection was needed. It lowers the volume when full intensity would have costed too much. It helps you survive environments where feeling everything fully would have made functioning harder, relationships less stable, work less manageable, or conflict more likely. So I want to be clear here. I'm not mocking coping. I'm not dismissing regulation. I'm not making some childish argument that all restraint is bad and the only healthy person is the one who spills every feeling in every direction. That is not what I'm saying. I am saying something narrower and probably more uncomfortable. I'm saying that a strategy can save you in one season and shrink you in the next. I'm saying relief can overstay its welcome. I'm saying protection can become identity. And when it does, people start confusing reduced emotional range with wisdom. They start calling it adulthood. They start calling it peace. They start calling it just who I am. Think about how this happens in real life. It starts small. You do not bring something up because the timing is bad. You let the hurt go because you don't want to ruin the evening. You swallow the anger because the consequences of expressing it feel more expensive than the anger itself. You keep moving because there is work to do. You distract because distraction is cleaner than contact. You stay busy because busyness feels productive, and stillness feels like a hallway you do not want to walk down. And every one of those choices makes sense in isolation. That's what makes it so hard to catch. There is no one single decision that sounds insane. There is no dramatic contract that says, sign here and agree to live at half volume for the next 10 years. No. It is built out of reasonable moments, defensible moments, adult moments. But repetition changes what those moments do. What begins as selective suppression becomes global narrowing. And the nervous system does not always separate out emotions you want gone from the emotions you wish would stay. People think they can mute anxiety without muting anticipation. Mute grief without muting tenderness. Mute rage without muting joy. Mute vulnerability without muting intimacy. Usually, they cannot. The system learns one main lesson. Less is safer. And once that lesson gets rewarded enough times, it stops asking for updates. Sedation doesn't live in anything that comes in a bottle. It settles in routine. The podcast always on during the drive, so there's no room for unstructured thought. The to-do list expanding to fill every available inch of your time. The notifications left on so attention stays in constant, shallow motion. The productivity rituals used not as support, but as deflection. Modern culture does not just tolerate this containment. It actually rewards it. You get praised for being dependable, for being even-keeled, for being drama-free, for absorbing pressure without leaking it into somebody else. In fact, partners rely on your steadiness. Friends call you chill. Colleagues trust your consistency. You do not demand much. You do not require much recalibration. You are easy to keep. Meanwhile, something vital recedes slowly enough that the absence barely registers. The unguarded laugh does not rise the same way it used to. Music enters the room but does not move through your body. A wind lands but leaves no residue. Grief registers as information before it registers as feeling. Life happens, but less of it gets in. That line matters. Less of it gets in. Because one of the most painful parts of this is that people do not often feel miserable enough to seek help for the actual issue. They do not come in saying, I'm numb. They come in saying, I'm tired. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what's wrong. I should be grateful. I'm functioning. I'm kind of flat. I don't feel terrible, but I don't feel much either. I'm doing everything right and it still feels like nothing is landing. That is a very different problem than open collapse. And because it's quieter, it gets missed. Sometimes by therapists, sometimes by partners, sometimes by the person themselves for years. Because if your entire life has become organized around preventing disruption, then a disruption-free life can start to look like success. Even if it's costing you contact, even if it's costing you texture, even if it's costing you your own emotional range. And here's the part I think a lot of people secretly know, but do not always say out loud. A life can be stable and still feel faint. A life can be healthy looking and still feel thin. A life can be full of structure and still feel like it's not actually reaching you. That does not mean you're ungrateful. It does not mean you're broken. It may mean your system got very, very good at protecting you from intensity and never learned how to reopen once the danger changed or went away. In the room, this often shows up in subtle ways. Someone talks about a promotion and sounds like they are reciting a weather report. Someone describes their child's big moment, the celebration, the crowd, the photos, the hugs. And what is missing is not memory, but felt experience. They can tell you what happened. They cannot tell you what moved. That difference matters. Some people become incredibly fluent in the language of self-awareness while still being disconnected from actual contact. They know the vocabulary, they know the frameworks, they know their triggers, attachment style, nervous system responses, boundaries, coping skills, routines, and practices. And that knowledge can be valuable. But knowledge is not the same thing as presence. You can become very skilled at managing yourself without fully inhabiting yourself. You can become highly proficient at staying regulated without feeling alive. And in a culture obsessed with optimization, that distinction gets lost all the time. because proficiency photographs well. It sounds healthy. It sounds mature. It sounds like someone who has done the work. But there is a form of self-management that is not healing. It is containment with a good reputation. The first dose worked. It protected you when you needed protection. It stabilized you when instability threatened to fracture everything. It bought you time. It bought you survival. It deserves credit for that. But any protection that never gets updated eventually becomes a constraint. Relief that lingers too long turns into posture. Control, when consistently rewarded, stops being questioned. And what began as adaptation starts being mistaken for identity. I'm low-key. I'm easygoing. I'm just not that emotional. This is just who I am now. Maybe. Or maybe that is what remains after years of trimming. The world praised the version of you that requires less, leaked less, reacted less, and needed less accommodation. So, your system kept investing in that version, and over time, the cost disappeared from your view. This is one of the most brutal parts of the entire subject. The world often rewards the sedated version of you. Not because people are evil, not because cultural is some kind of giant conspiracy, but because a contained person is easier for the system to absorb. Easier at work, easier in families, easier in relationships, easier in institutions, easier in unstable environments. A person who can keep moving under pressure without requiring a lot from other people will usually be praised. And again, some of that praise is earned, but we almost never ask what the steadiness cost internally. How much preemptive filtering is happening? How much self-silencing? How much constant management? How much narrowing? How much is being passed down before it even gets close to language? Because when that becomes automatic, the labor goes invisible. Other people experience the results, but you experience the cost. Quietly, over time. And usually without a dramatic enough symptom to justify stopping everything and naming it. So, the pattern continues. You become more efficient, more controlled, more managed, and less reachable by your own life. That is a hard sentence, but I think it's true for a lot of people. You can become less reachable by your own life. The moments still happen. The achievements still happen. The losses still happen. The closeness still happens. The beauty still happens. But it does not penetrate the same way. You observe more than you participate. You maintain more than you inhabit. You function more than you feel. And if that goes on long enough, you start calling it normal. So what is the first dose, besides the first chapter of the book? It is not one thing. Sometimes it's a childhood environment where big feelings created instability instead of connection. Sometimes it's adolescence where vulnerability got mocked. Sometimes it's a marriage, relationship, workplace, or family system that punished disruption more than dishonesty. Sometimes it's the accumulated lessons that emotion costs too much and control pays better. The form changes, the lessons stay the same. Feeling fully is expensive. Feeling less is adaptive. And to be fair, sometimes that lesson is true for a while. That's why the first dose makes total sense. That's why people reach for it. That's why I refuse to speak about this with contempt. Sedation is not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's not a moral failure. It is intelligent adaptation that stayed too long. That is the frame. And if you miss that, you turn this into blame. I'm not interested in blame. I'm interested in recognition. Because recognition is where the work starts. Not with shaming yourself for coping, not with romanticizing chaos, not with deciding every limit and every routine was fake, but with a more honest question. Where did something that once protected me become the thing that now keeps me at a distance from my own experience? That is the question. Where did coping stop helping me return to life and start helping me avoid it? Where did regulation stop being support and start becoming the ceiling? Where did control become my identity? This is not an argument against therapy. This is not an argument against medication. It's not an argument against stability, structure, or legitimate tools that prepare people to use to survive. It is asking something more difficult. What have we normalized in the name of wellness that we continue using long after it stops being medicine? What happens when avoidance earns a respectable label? What happens when regulation becomes the highest virtue and presence becomes optional? Life continues, but it thins. Texture fades. Moments lose their temperature. Experience becomes manageable, but less transformative. And somewhere underneath all the reasonable explanations, a quieter knowing remains. This version of living takes more than it gives. That's where I'm going to leave this first one. Not with a fix, not with a clean little list, not with 5 steps, 3 tools, and some polished framework you can use to walk away feeling better for 10 minutes while nothing actually changes underneath. I'm leaving you with the part most people avoid, the confrontation. Because maybe the question is not whether you're falling apart badly enough to deserve attention. Maybe the question is whether you've gotten so good at functioning that nobody notices what's gone missing, including you. Maybe the question is whether the life you're managing still reaches you, not whether you're productive, not whether you're disciplined, not whether you keep the bills paid, show up on time, answer the texts, and hold your role together well enough for everyone else to keep benefiting from your control. I mean something deeper than that. Does your life still touch you? Do your days still land? Does joy still get all the way in? Or does it brush past you and disappear before it leaves a mark? Does grief still move you through? Or do you immediately turn it into logic, perspective, gratitude, or something manageable? Does anger still tell you the truth? Or have you trained yourself to shut it down before it even gets close to language? Does love still feel alive in your body? Or has it become duty, consistency, and one more thing you know how to perform well? That's the question. Not whether you're stable, whether you're still alive inside the stability. Not whether you've avoided collapse, but whether you've avoided the life right along with it. Because some of you are not in pain the way you used to be. But you're not really here either. You're not drowning, but you're not fully living. You're not falling apart, but you're not being changed by your own existence anymore. And that is the hardest thing to admit, because from the outside, it all looks fine, maybe even impressive. Maybe people depend on you because of how fine you look. Maybe they trust your steadiness. Maybe they praise how calm you are. Maybe they like how little you require, how little you leak, how little disruption you bring into a room. And maybe that steadiness costs you more than anyone ever bothered to ask. Maybe you got rewarded for becoming easier to carry, easier to work with, easier to live with, easier to love. And somewhere in the middle of becoming manageable, you lost contact with parts of yourself nobody ever taught you how to get back. That's what this book's about. Sedated is not about dramatic collapse. It's not about the obvious breakdown. It's about the quieter thing, the slow disappearance that gets mistaken for maturity, the emotional narrowing that gets praised as healing, the over-controlled life that gets called wisdom, The forms of survival people clap for because they make you easier for the world to deal with. This is about what happens when coping stops being something you use and starts becoming who you are. When protection hardens into personality. When control becomes identity. When numbness gets such a good reputation that you stop questioning it. And this is only the beginning, because recognizing it is one thing, but the next question is the harder one. What did this protect you from? What did feeling cost you? Who taught you that full honesty was too much? Who benefited from your silence? Who got comfort from your restraint? Who kept getting the best of you while you kept getting further away from yourself? That's where we're going next, not into the shallow motivation, not into fake empowerment, not into something clean and easy and marketable. Nope, we're going deeper, chapter by chapter, layer by layer, straight through the parts most people spend their whole lives avoiding. So, if something in this hit you, don't do what you usually do. Don't brush past it. Don't intellectualize it too quickly. Don't turn it into a quote. Don't nod at it and move on. I want you to sit in it, as uncomfortable as it is. Listen to those questions again on repeat and feel it. Let it bother you. Let it follow you for a bit. Let it get close enough to challenge the version of you that has been calling survival peace. And when you do that, come back for the next one. Because the first dose is never just about what hurt you. It's about what the relief trained you to become. And if you never question that training, you can spend the rest of your life calling yourself healed, when really, you just learned how to go numb without making a mess. If you're going to take this any further, then do something with it. Don't just agree with it. Don't just feel seen for a few minutes. Don't just sit there nodding while your life stays exactly the same. Put your hands on something. That's what the guided journals are for. They're not built to comfort you. They're built to expose you. They're there to drag your attention back to the places you keep performing, hiding, minimizing, rationalizing, and calling it fine because fine is easier than honesty. This is not about sounding insightful. It's about catching yourself in real time, catching the pattern, catching the lie, catching the moment you abandon yourself and call it maturity. And if you look through the journals and immediately think, none of these really are going to help me, that reaction usually tells on you. Most people don't resist the irrelevant one. They resist the accurate one. The one that gets too close. The one that threatens the story. The one that starts pulling at the part of you that already knows something is off. That's usually the place to start. And this is not a massive ask. 3 minutes a day, that's it. No long ritual, no performance, no fake deep routine you can turn into another way to avoid yourself. Just 3 real minutes with something that tells the truth back to you. And the effect is rarely dramatic at first. Usually it works the same way. Real change works quietly. You think nothing is happening. You think it's too small to matter. You think it didn't land. Then a few days or weeks, you catch yourself in the middle of an old pattern with new eyes. And suddenly you can't unknow or unsee what you just saw. That's when it starts doing its job. If you want the journals, the books, or anything connected to this work, it's all on carlhgregory.com. Use the journals to track the places where you perform instead of speak, where you disappear instead of stay present, where you betray yourself to keep the peace, where you hand your worth to other people and then wonder why you feel hollow. Not so you can shame yourself, not so you can become your own interrogator, just so you can finally see clearly. Because once you see clearly, your excuses start losing their power. And clarity will move your life faster than motivation ever will. If you want the written side of this work, go to my Substack. You can also find the link within my website. That's where I lay it all out in full. No extra noise, no polished distractions, just the words. And if this episode hit you, Don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, send me a message, tell me what you liked or didn't like, what pissed you off or what didn't. You can find me on Instagram and anywhere else. Share it with a person in your life who looks fine on the outside, but is quietly carrying too much on the inside. A friend, a brother, a sister, a partner, whoever came to mind while you were listening. And subscribe, because we're not done. There's more coming, and I'm not interested in giving you content just to fill your time. I'm here to give you something that gets under your skin enough to make you tell the truth. As always, stay in the fight, stay honest, and stop calling survival the same thing as living.